ERG sponsor has not lifted a finger since you added their name to the slide deck? You're not alone, and this video is for you. Let's talk about how you can actually get support that works and makes a difference. I am Sheryl Miller, and this is ERG Strategy, the channel that helps you build effective, engaged employee resource groups and communities that make a difference. So if that's what you're here for, we put out videos on a Tuesday and I go live every Friday, 8:30 UK time here and on LinkedIn. So please do subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you know when videos are out. So, should you have more than one sponsor is a question we were asked on a recent webinar. And in fact, the question was, is it okay to have co-sponsors, as they're sometimes called? So I'll tell you what we're going to cover today in this video. What is the role of a sponsor? How to get your sponsor working for you, why having two sponsors can be bad, why having two sponsors can be good, and then I'm going to leave you with a little tip to take if you're struggling to get support from your sponsor. So let's get into this. What is the role of a sponsor? So as you may know, my background is actually transformation, big change, big projects, big programs. I am an accountant as well, but then latterly in my career, I went and led transformation programs. So typically when you have change like that in a business, change on a big scale, big project, big program, big strategic objective or strategic initiative, you typically have a sponsor, typically an exec sponsor, senior leader, and they generally know what to do. However, and I've noticed this, when it comes to ERGs and networks, employee resource groups, for some reason, sponsors sometimes struggle. And I don't know whether it's because sometimes maybe they're not sure of the role that they need to play in terms of, you know, saying the wrong thing, or because it's a slightly sensitive area, so they're dancing on eggshells. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but one of the things that I always sort of say is sponsors need to think about this in the same way that they would if they were sponsoring any other project or program. So what do sponsors typically do when they're sponsoring projects and programs? They make sure you've got enough resources. They make sure that there are no obstacles, right? So they help to kind of like remove blockers and deal with, you know, maybe difficult people and or situations, right? They champion you across the senior leadership team and also across the organisation more widely. So these are the kinds of things that they typically do. But for some reason, when it comes to ERGs, we just sort of don't see them in the same way, and I'm not sure exactly why not. Interestingly, I had a conversation with an ERG leader recently, and he was struggling with some barriers, some people that were kind of blocking things that he needed to do in the ERG. And I said to him, who's your sponsor? And he said, it's the CEO. And I said, okay, so here's the thing. You need to have a conversation with your CEO, who is your sponsor, and let them know what is happening so that they can actually work for you. Which brings me on to our second point, how to get sponsors working for you. Now here's the thing, you need to be clear in terms of what you need, and just like that story that I've given you, you know, there was a specific situation where the individual was getting blockers, you know, there were blockers, barriers, etc. in the organisation. So you need to go to your sponsor and you need to explain to them what is happening and the support that you need from them. So the first thing is you need to be really clear on what you need from the sponsor. Ideally, you need to give them something specific to do, right? And that could be, you know, all kinds of things. It could be that you specifically want input from them in terms of the strategy for your ERG. It could be that you want them to turn up at every, you know, event that you do and open, you know, and say a few words about the ERG, etc. Whatever it is, you need to think about what it is that you want them to actually do, right? Because I get too many ERG sponsors, too many ERG leaders who are kind of like, yeah, I haven't even seen or spoken to my sponsor for like 6 months. Okay. Give them something to do, right? So that they have to actually show up because they have something to do. The other thing I would say is in terms of regular catch-ups and one-to-ones, I mean, you should really be having a monthly one-to-one, and that's maybe something I'll delve into in a future video just to give you some advice as to what that should look like. But use those regular meetings for it to actually be like a two-way conversation, but also use those regular meetings to actually put your requests in. So if you are having like a regular catch-up, or the sponsor, if you're fortunate enough, if the sponsor is coming to your, for example, your committee meetings every now and then, have your requests ready, right? Have what you need ready to ask them when you meet them. In fact, I would almost go one step further and say, you know, if you are going into the office and you know that your sponsor is going to be there, like have your little elevator pitch ready. So it can be like, yeah, we did X, Y, and Z last month. We're planning to do this. Can you please support us with? And be really clear. But yeah, use those little moments and definitely be asking them for their input, for their ideas, etc. Even if they, you know, don't have lived experience. So if they don't necessarily have the same identity as the, you know, as the ERG. So for example, if it's an LGBTQ plus ERG and the sponsor is hetero, right? It doesn't matter, right? You can still ask them for their input and their ideas. So that's the other thing, get the sponsor working for you. Now let's get into two sponsors and why having two sponsors can be bad. And I'm going to start first of all in the world of projects and programs. And this is something I have seen. So I have led programs where, for example, there is a particular work stream that has had two sponsors, and what it can sometimes lead to, and this is the downside, it can sometimes lead to slight conflict if they don't share the same opinion in terms of how something should be done. So how do you deal with that? You know, if you kind of get two sponsors, or if you have got two senior leaders and they share a slightly different view. I mean, one of the ways to deal with that is you could do a little bit of like divide it between you and your co-chair or your co-lead, go and have conversations with the two different sponsors, work out what the issues are, then bring them back together and kind of almost like try to work it through in that way. The one thing I would advise not to do is to try to iron out these differences in a bigger meeting, you know, so for example in a committee meeting, because, you know, the more senior people get, the more they've got at stake in terms of being right or being wrong, and the more egos come into play. So if there are issues in terms of disagreements, for example, between sponsors, always better to handle it in as small a meeting as possible, preferably one-to-one, and then, you know, then you bring the sponsors together. So that's one of the reasons why it can be a little bit tricky if you have more than one sponsor. Another thing that can happen when you have more than one sponsor is you can have one that kind of almost like starts to sit back and put their feet up because the other one is doing all of the work, and that's obviously not the aim of it. So that is something that you kind of have to manage. I think if you see that sort of thing happening, you kind of have a conversation with the more active sponsor and say, you know, could you have a word with, you know, other sponsor over there, you know, Joe, who's kind of put their feet up and is sitting back a little bit. So again, you know, with your active sponsor, get them to help to get the other sponsor more involved. I mean, it may well be that the other sponsor is struggling for capacity at the time, which actually that is one of the benefits of having two sponsors. So let's get into why having two sponsors can be a good thing. So here's the thing, you know, these senior leaders, often they have a lot on their plates, right? Even, you know, think of all the chaos that we've got in the world at the moment, like with the economy and everything, right? So often senior leaders and execs can have a lot on their plate. So when you have two sponsors, why it can be good is if one has got a lot on, for example, in their business area, the other one can kind of like pick up the slack and compensate for the fact that the other one is busy. And then maybe when they are busy, then the other one can pick up the slack. So that is why having two sponsors can be good. It kind of just shares the workload and just means that you're not just relying on this one sponsor, and if something happens and they're taken out of the business or whatever, you know, you're then stuck without a sponsor. The other reason that having more than one sponsor can be good, it can actually create a little bit of peer pressure and a little bit of healthy competition between the sponsors so that they actually both want to kind of show up and do the best for you as an ERG. So that can be a really good thing. And I have seen this with sponsors when I've been running programs. They're almost in competition to see who can be the best sponsor, which is great, right? Because then that really starts to do things like open doors and get the word out in the organisation about your ERG. And that's the other thing, by having more than one sponsor who typically look after more than one business area, right? You don't want two sponsors from the same business area, you want them to look after different business areas, because what that means is the word on the street, the word about you as an ERG is going to be getting much more wider. You're going to be championed more wider across the business. So when that comes to things like recruiting more members, recruiting volunteers for the committee, potential collaborations with other departments, or going into other teams to talk about what it is that the ERG is doing, you know, you've got more of a network because you've now got 2 sponsors that are kind of singing your praises rather than just one. So that's another reason why 2 sponsors can be good. And also what 2 sponsors can be used for, and I've seen this work really well, you can have a situation where you have one of the sponsors who has the same lived experience as the employee resource group, and then another one who is the ally, and then you get the best of both. Because what sometimes happens, and I see this particularly, say for example, if you've got like a race and ethnicity ERG and the sponsor is a person of colour, sometimes, you know, it's actually almost like an added burden on that exec sponsor as well, because they're still going through their own challenges, right, in the board. Just because they're senior and they're in exec, it doesn't mean that they aren't still facing the same challenges. So sometimes you have 2 sponsors, you can have one that has the lived experience, but then you've got that ally. And what it does then, it also takes the pressure off that exec member who is also, you know, part of the ERG community as well. So that's one of the benefits of having 2 sponsors. So as you see, I am actually a big fan of having 2 sponsors over employee resource groups. I actually think it's better than having 2 sponsors over a project or a program, because I think the subject matter is less contentious, right? There is less to disagree on when you have 2 sponsors looking after an ERG. So I am a big fan. And so I want to leave you with a little bit of action. So if you are struggling with your sponsor, you know, obviously I've talked about being really clear in terms of what you need from the sponsor. But here's the thing. So obviously we have got the ERG maturity model, which is this online tool that you can go and fill in. It takes literally less than 3 minutes. And I always suggest to individuals, and I've done this when I'm doing training, go and fill in the ERG maturity model. You'll then get like a little report. It's kind of just like for free. It drops into your email. Go and have a conversation with your sponsor, using that as a framework, discussing where you feel you are as an ERG. And if in the back of your mind you're thinking, yeah, we'd be a lot further if the sponsor was actually doing what they should be doing, it's a useful way of opening the conversation about what more your sponsor could do for you, and or whether your sponsor thinks it could help to maybe add a second sponsor to lighten their workload, particularly if the issue is that they haven't got capacity, right? So you've got a tool, you've got the report from like the ERG maturity model. You're then basically going to put some time in with your sponsor. You're going to talk about, where do you think we are? This is how I scored it. This is where we're trying to get to. We could probably do with a little bit more sponsor support. Can you help us in this areas? If you can't because you haven't got the capacity, do you think it might be worth us getting a second sponsor? Particularly if your sponsor is somebody who has the same identity, lived experience, then it's perfect saying, do you think it's worth getting a sponsor who is an ally, who doesn't have lived experience? Okay, so that is how I would approach that if you're looking to get some more sponsor support. And that's it for today's video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have got any questions, please do put them below in the comments. If you have anything that particularly worked for you with a sponsor, particularly maybe if they needed to pull their finger out a little bit, just put that in the comments as well. Particularly if you're anonymous, you might not want to do it if they're going to find out who you are. So that's it for today. If you've got any more questions, please leave them. Please give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you on Friday for the live here and or on LinkedIn. That's it for today. Go with grace.